Hi, I want to make a video about the circumstance subject again, and it has to do with being a victim of your circumstance. You know how sometimes we're victims of our circumstance and we can't blame the circumstance. Obviously, I've said this, it's the only thing to blame, but you're a part of the circumstance and you're created by the circumstance. So you can't blame them because they're part of a circumstance that led them to this circumstance, which you are saying you're making the accusation say towards, but that accusation itself is part of the circumstance. So the circumstance and generally speaking, is the thing that takes the blame and takes all the credit for the things that happen in the circumstance. It's the thing that has to take the blame, but you can't blame it because the things that create the circumstance are the things that you're interacting with because you're in the circumstance. So since they're victims of the circumstance and I'm victims of the circumstance, we can't do anything beyond be part of the circumstance that creates us and our interaction that happen to happen, and we react by, say, putting the blame and that something's going to happen based on the circumstance to someone else, and I'm going to have something's going to happen to me based on the interaction that we have. So you can't blame, say, the circumstance. It's the only thing to blame, but you can't blame because there's nothing to blame because it's just the thing that made you the victim, and you're the victim of every single circumstance that's happened to you so far, leading to you, say, being a serial murderer or serial rapist. You can't entirely be blamed, but you are going to be blamed because you're the person perpetrating the crime. You're the victim of the circumstance that's going to be the victim of the next circumstance, which is going to be the one that's going to be the victim of, say, you going to prison because you were captured. And that's the only thing we can do. Deterrence, and that's what it means in the end, deterring against more suffering. And that's where the philosophy comes in, is the value and the suffering, and the hard science is almost in a way separate. But it means one. They're both in the same mechanism. They're both moving around, and the thing that creates the philosophy is created by science. Obviously. Right? Right? I mean, that's obvious, right? Isn't that obvious? I think it is. Yeah, so I mentioned this in a previous video of mine, how the real point of this video I want to make, hopefully a quick one, is you know how you're the victim of the circumstance, and obviously sometimes you have to be the martyr, say, to save 100 lives. So you're going to die as a martyr to save 100 people. So if you're going to be the martyr to save the 100 people, well then, you know, almost question, why should I save the 100 people? If one of these 100 people, if I'm going to save these 100 people, who's to say that the same exact circumstance won't befall someone else that I save? Why not just let them die? It depends on how they die, of course, and how much suffering in the end, but we only know so much. But if we were told beforehand, obviously that contrivance can't be made unless you're locked in something and you told a general way that things are going to happen. They're going to die horribly and burning in fire, and you're going to die quickly. Obviously, generally speaking, you'd say, yes, I guess I have to die, but into a certain circumstance, they're all dying, obviously horribly, and that obviously you dying would be probably the most correct path, at least in the closed experiment where you're obviously the one that's gonna be the victim, that's gonna survive, to let the other 100 people survive. Obviously, very arbitrary way of looking at value, but at least to describing the circumstance, a general idea is the idea that yes, the general idea is yes, in that closed circumstance, you can say that you are the one that's going to have to be the victim here. But obviously everyone else can be a victim. So if you save these 100 people, who's to say the same exact thing will happen to them? Obviously they'll die in the fire, but say they survive and they're put in the exact same circumstance. Um, so now they're going to be the one that has to die. And who's contrive anything to say the exact same thing? The more people you have to exist, the more likely, obviously, living day by day and living those contrivances. But who's to say that what makes them worth anything? If they're going to be exactly in the same position, or if they're even possibly going to be in the same position as you. You're being useless. You're useful in saving them, but you're pretty much useless because you're useful to save them, but you're useless yourself, and therefore you're going to have to be the martyr and the victim of the circumstance to save their lives, right? So if you're useless and they can have the same circumstance happen to them, obviously it's about deterrence of suffering, but if the same thing can happen to them, why would you save them if it's possible for them to have the same circumstance? Because, hey, you never know what can happen to them. They can end up having 20 kids or whatever it may be, and they can cause all sorts of other horrible disasters from, you know, they can start all sorts of bad things. And you never know. Obviously, if you know the very specifics, they're all 90-year-old people, and why, you know, why sacrifice yourself, they're going to die in one, month anyway. And then if they're worth saving, then they're probably young and they're probably going to, procreate or whatever the freak it is, or they're fixed or whatever, just whatever it is. You never know exactly what's going to happen if even the thing that they exist for might end up being even worse than this circumstance. So if you're useless and you're saving a bunch of useful people, well then aren't they just as useless as the person that's being the victim to save the, say, the 100 other people? I guess a very simplistic thought experiment. Then what makes you any more worth it, them any more worth it than you? Because the same exact thing can happen to them. Generally speaking, obviously, if you're a victim right now, who's to say they won't be a victim next? Who's to say that you never know? Even the most important person can be a victim. But obviously they're not important if you're going to put them at the flame, if you're going to make them a victim over here. So if they're just as much, if you're a martyr, then they're just as much a martyr. So if you're useless, you're saving a bunch of other useless people. What's the point in that, right? If you're useless, you're saving a bunch of other people to be useless is just as much as you were useless in the circumstance where you have to be the martyr, the victim, to save the other useless people. For what reason? Who knows? Let's just say all these people are exactly the same. Exact same circumstance. They just happen to be over there, and then you happen to be over here. Clones, whatever. And you just wonder, well, if I survive, if I let them die, then 100 people die, and I survive. That means a lot of suffering. But generally speaking, I know I should suffer. So these 100 people survive, and then that means there's less suffering. But then again, I'm useless, and that means that they're just as much. Who knows what's going to happen to them? And if anything, they can be in the exact same circumstance as me. Almost say like after they survive, there's going to be one person out of there that has to be the next person to be they sort of like the Hunger Games or whatever it is. You pick a name out of a straw, and whoever gets named is going to be the next victim that has to be chosen. So you survive, but one of you has to be chosen to be the next victim that has to be the martyr to save the next 100 people from surviving. And say 50 people out of the previous batch have to be in the same batch again, or you pick out names or whatever it is. And then what's the point if you're just going to be constantly a victim? Okay, you avoided the lottery today, now go do your job. And what's the point? You're just as useless. You're just going to pick a name out of a lottery and you're going to be put on the freaking the chopping board. That doesn't make much sense. I'm sorry. So what's the point in that when you're just going to be a victim of the circumstance just as much as someone else? So if you're useless, if you're going to be a victim, everyone else might as well be a victim, because if you're useless, everyone else is useless. And you shouldn't be a victim. Once you have one victim, you're one victim too many. Once you said ouch, once you've been in pain, once you've had one negative value, you're one negative value too much. And at that point, you just say, well, we're stuck in this mechanism. There's only so much we can do, and it's about deterrence, and that's all we have control over. And at this point, the only way really to deter is, say, prevent childbirth as much as we can, procreation, or to, not satisfy your silly desires and needs because you're an idiot, or whatever it may be, because you desire kids to, stroke off on, or whatever it is that you're getting off on, or blow up the planet. I mean, obviously those are two good ideas. Prevent childbirth. Well, the quick one, the best one, obviously, just annihilate everything. Strategically place atom bombs, nuclear bombs across all the planet. Obviously, I'm advocating for it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. Obviously, this is one good way. Strategically place atom bombs all across the planet, 1 mile apart, and blow them to bits. You don't have to do every other place. You just do find, a nuclear core, go down to the middle of the Earth and let the Earth just blow up instantly. Like a giant atom bomb. And who cares what happens, because nothing else means anything. It doesn't matter if the universe swallows itself because we blew up the solar system. It doesn't matter once there's no living things. So it doesn't matter if there's living things once we are dead. It doesn't matter what happens to the universe, because there's no projection of us existing. And there's nothing to this projection than I see, ooh, I touch. I think, ooh, 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 I touch myself, and I have little ooh, ooh feelings, and that's all we're experiencing. But just because there's no us doesn't mean, and the universe happens to work a certain way, that doesn't mean that the universe is not going to, that needs us to have that interaction happen. So, once there's no us, it doesn't matter what happens, but that doesn't mean something isn't happening. So something's still happening, and I think that's something that people confuse, because something's still happening in the universe. There's just no us happen. That it just doesn't need us, and there's no us to interact or project onto that. But once there's no us, it doesn't matter what happens, because it doesn't matter anymore, because there's no us to project or interact or sensate or feel or anything. Because at that point it's mute and, doesn't mean anything. It's null, nil. It means zippity doo dah day. Doesn't mean anything. So yeah, that's the basic point of this video. It's not much of anything. If you're useless, they're useless. So why save the useless people, especially when you never know? But in the circumstance, obviously, okay, if I suffer, but then I'll prevent them from having to be in the lottery if they die. And this is generally speaking, for life, generally speaking. Obviously, it's not in many circumstances, but you're going to be stuck in a circumstance, even the small circumstances of losing the lottery or getting in a car accident. You're going to be in some, not necessarily a car accident, but any accident, anything. You break your leg jumping on a trampoline. You break your neck. I mean, all sorts of little lotteries you're picking out. You're going to be your next victim. It's going to be one of those things where you have to choose, okay, what's this or that or whatever it is. And you're going to have to consider the possibilities, and you're going to have to go with them and see what's the best value, and take the possibility as much as you can and see what you can do and predict as much as you can to see what the best possible outcome is. And generally speaking, you can only have so much of an expectation. The expectation can only lead you so far. So the expectation could lead you to, obviously, I can't see anywhere past this, so I just know 100 people there are suffering or me suffering. I guess I gotta suffer because they're suffering. I know more than them. They're a bunch of idiots, but it's about suffering. But I can prevent more deaths, but I can only know so much, and I can only do so much, but I can do it based, okay, so they said I need to meet them there, and I can, write a paper that can change the world, but I'm stuck in this circumstance now, so if I do this, I might end up doing that, but I don't know, and I can change the world, but they're here suffering right now, so you have to make a value judgment. And the value judgment is going to happen one way or another. Something's going to happen. You're both going to live. Everyone's going to live. You're going to die. They're going to live. They're going to live. You're going to die. Something's going to happen. Yeah, you're going to have to make that value judgment. And that value judgment's going to happen a certain way, and there's only so much you can do, because our value judgments don't mean much of anything. A value exists, but they don't mean anything, and since they don't mean anything, it just really just shows that something's just going to happen a certain way, and there's only so much we can do to stop it or do it, because we can't stop what's going to happen. It's going to happen a certain way, and once it's happened, we can't do anything but look back and say that's the way it happened. So once it's happened, we can only do so much through this value judgment, because that's just based on possibility and projection. Something's going to happen a certain way, a certain amount of value is going to happen, and it's going to do this or do that. But beforehand, we still have that power to change what we know beyond a reasonable expectation, what we know we can change, and we can only know right now, or we can project and say what's going to happen then. We learned those lessons, we can't change it, but right now, looking forward, we can say, okay, I can either die and let these people live, we can find a way to escape, but I risk having us both die. So we both die, we both live, I live or they live, and I die or they die. 4 possible outcomes, and you can choose, and you're going to risk something either way, so it's when you choose let them live or let I die, or you choose one of those options, and you can only know so much. Okay, I know if I live, then I can do this, but I don't know because they didn't return my call or whatever. Specific circumstances, silly contrivances. Then again, you never know. You can only project so much based on the knowledge that you know. Right at that current moment in time, based on previous things that have happened, to see what may be the best outcome for the circumstance and how much value you can save, based on simple possibilities and projections that you know more, or probabilities that you know more likely to happen. Which one's more probable? Whatever that vague word that really doesn't mean much, because obviously things are going to happen a certain way. It doesn't mean our value judgments mean nothing based on this interaction, because something's going to happen a certain way, and the value judgment's going to present itself in reality, regardless of what we think. So the value judgment's going to exist in one way or another. It's just beforehand we have the power to change it, because we're doing the thing moving forward, even though we're part of the mechanism, because we're going to make the mechanism either worse or better, and that's the point I'm making. It's something that's going to get better or it's going to get worse, and we can only do so much, and we can only have so much of an expectation of what we're going to happen, to choose whether the circumstance now needs to be the thing that we have to think about, or the circumstance for projecting. Okay, then do I save myself so I can do that, or do I save them and I know I'll be saving them? But then again, I don't know, so maybe I should live, because I don't know if the person controlling this experiment is going to let them live after I die, because they could just end up dying too. So you have to make all these value judgments, and there's only so much you can do. And at that point, intent's the only thing you could put any kind of meaning towards, because intent at that point is the only thing you can hold on to. So once it's happening, he tried his best. He had the best intentions, but it just didn't happen to work out. And something was going to happen a certain way, and end up being sucky. But who knows? It could have been worse if it happened another way. It's one of those circumstances where you can only know so much. He couldn't have done this, but we don't know. What if he got in a car accident on the way back to there, or rake him in the face or something? He stepped on a rake and it bashed him in the face or something. Who knows? You could have gone insane. You never know about these things. You can have possibilities. You can say, we know now that this person could have happened, or this could have happened, but we still only know so much. And there's always things that can get in the way, because things, just a bunch of interactions, and we're the victims of these interactions, and we can only do so much to change these interactions. We can only be moving in these interactions. We can only move. We can't change to a certain extent. So yes. That's the basic idea. I don't want to go on too much longer. It's a very simple idea. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If I have anything else to mention, I can always mention it in another video. And I could go on this again if anything else needs to be explained. So thank you, and until next time, bye.